She didn't cry when she signed the papers. That was the part that surprised her most. Isabel Crane had imagined it 100 times during the 3 weeks the documents sat on the kitchen counter. Imagined herself breaking down. Imagined Marcus having to hand her tissues. Imagined making a scene that would at least force him to feel something. But when the morning finally came, when her attorney slid the pen across the conference table and said, "Take your time," Isabel picked it up and signed her name in one clean, unbroken line. Isabel Crane, not Isabel Hargrove. She'd already decided that before she walked in the door. She hadn't been Isabel Hargrove for a long time. She just hadn't known it yet. 14 years. That's how long she had been married to Derek Hargrove. 14 years of building something together, or so she'd believed. A home in Naperville, a marriage that looked good from the outside, a life she'd shaped herself around his career, his schedule, his vision of what they were supposed to become. She had given up a position at a Chicago architecture firm to relocate when Derek's company opened its Midwest headquarters. She had rearranged her freelance work around his travel schedule. She had attended every board dinner, every charity gala, every weekend corporate retreat with a smile that she'd practiced so long it became reflexive. And in return, Derek had been sleeping with his communications director, Paige Whitmore, for 2 years. 2 years. Isabel had done the math afterward, the way you do when the wound is fresh and your mind won't stop reaching for detail. 2 years meant the trip to Tuscany they'd taken for their 12th anniversary. The one Derek had called long overdue, just the two of us, had happened while it was already going on. 2 years meant every Sunday morning, every family dinner with her parents, every quiet evening when he'd kissed her forehead and called her Is. All of it had been happening alongside something else entirely. She found out the way most people find out. Not from a confession, not from a confrontation. She found out from a photo. A mutual friend had texted her by accident. A screenshot of something shared in a group chat Isabel hadn't been in. A photo of Derek and Paige at a restaurant in the West Loop, his hand on the back of her chair, her head tilted toward him. The caption someone had written read, "Finally, they just need to go public already." Her friend had sent it to her, thinking it was a different thread. She apologized 40 seconds later. By then, Isabel had already read it 4 times. She hadn't called Derek. She'd driven to her sister's house and sat in the driveway for 11 minutes before going inside. Her sister Jenna had opened the door, taken one look at her face and said, "What did he do?" Not a question, a statement, like she'd been waiting for this phone call or this visit for longer than Isabel realized. That had hurt almost as much as the photo. The divorce negotiations took 4 months. Derek's attorney, a man named Philip Coates, who wore 3-piece suits and never made eye contact, tried to argue that Isabel's freelance architecture work constituted a secondary income stream that reduced her claim to marital assets. What he meant was that Derek wanted to keep as much of the Hargrove real estate portfolio as possible, while giving Isabel the least the law would allow. What Isabel's attorney, a sharp-tongued woman named Beverly Okafor Walsh, did in response was present a 14-year paper trail of every dinner hosted, every relocation made, every career opportunity deferred. And she presented it without raising her voice once. Derek sat across the table from Isabel during those sessions and looked at her like she was a problem to be managed. That was the thing she couldn't get past. Not the anger, not the grief, the way he looked at her like she was an obstacle. Like the 14 years had been reduced, in his mind, to a transaction that hadn't gone his way. She signed the papers on a Tuesday morning in March. She did not cry. The apartment she rented afterward was on the 3rd floor of a building in Logan Square. 2 bedrooms, wood floors, a kitchen window that faced west and caught the afternoon light. She told herself she'd chosen it for the light. Jenna said she'd chosen it because it looked nothing like the Naperville house, which was true, and Jenna was almost always right about things like that. The first few weeks were quiet in a way that felt wrong, then felt right, then felt like something she hadn't had permission to want before. She started working again. Real work. Not the small residential commissions she'd taken while organizing her schedule around Derek's. She reached out to a former colleague at a firm called Alcott & Miles, and they brought her on for a mixed-use development project in River North. The work was hard and specific and required her full attention, and she was grateful for that. She told almost no one about the pregnancy. She hadn't known when she signed the papers. The timing would have mattered, legally. Beverly had told her that much during one of their early meetings, as a kind of general briefing. "If there's anything else I should know," Beverly had said, watching her carefully. There was nothing to know at the time. Isabel had been so consumed by the facts of the betrayal that the idea of a pregnancy hadn't crossed her mind as something to consider. She found out 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized. She sat on the edge of the bathtub in her Logan Square apartment and stared at the test for a long time. Outside the kitchen window, a pigeon landed on the fire escape and then left. A car alarm went off somewhere on the street and then stopped. Isabel sat there with the test in her hand and did the only rational thing available to her. She said out loud to no one, "Okay." She did not call Derek. She had a reason not to, beyond the obvious ones. During the final weeks of the divorce proceedings, Derek's attorney had buried a clause in a supplementary agreement. Beverly had caught it during a late-night review of the amended filing, had called Isabel at 10:45 in the evening, and had explained, in a voice that was controlled but barely, that Derek's team had inserted language that functionally signed away any future parental claim Isabel might exercise in connection with shared assets going forward. The clause was written in the kind of legal architecture that looked like standard boilerplate until you read it 3 times. Beverly had pulled it from the agreement before signing. She'd flagged it as an attempted overreach and documented it. But the fact that it had been put there at all, drafted, inserted, and submitted without Derek mentioning it once, told Isabel everything she needed to know about who Derek Hargrove had become, or perhaps had always been. She was not going to tell him about the baby. Her doctor, a calm and unflappable woman named Dr. Yolanda Ferris Burke, discovered during the 12-week ultrasound that there were 2. Isabel stared at the screen. "Twins," Dr. Ferris Burke said, in the same tone she might use to report a blood pressure reading. "Twins," Isabel repeated. "Fraternal, both measuring well." Isabel drove home, in silence, parked in the alley behind her building, and called Jenna. When Jenna picked up, Isabel said, "I need you to not say anything for the first 30 seconds. Okay, I'm having twins." The 30 seconds of silence lasted approximately 4. "Isabel, I know." "Twins?" "I know, Jenna. How are you this calm right now?" "I'm not," Isabel said, and then she laughed, a real laugh, the kind that surprised her, the kind that came from somewhere she hadn't accessed in months. "I'm really not." She didn't know about the investigation into Derek's company until it was already public. She had been careful, deliberately, to remove Derek Hargrove from her daily field of awareness. She unfollowed the business pages she'd followed for years. She stopped reading the Crane's Chicago business section, which she'd always read primarily because Derek tracked his press coverage, and she'd absorbed the habit. She was 7 months pregnant, working remotely on the River North project from her apartment because her back hurt in a way that sitting at a desk for 8 hours made significantly worse. And she was focused, almost entirely, on the specific and manageable problems directly in front of her. The news came through Jenna, who texted her a link on a Thursday afternoon with the message, "Don't spiral. Just read." The article was from the Chicago Tribune's business desk. Derek Hargrove, CEO of Hargrove Real Estate Development, had been suspended by his own board of directors, pending an internal investigation into financial disclosures connected to a $34 million development deal in the South Loop. According to the article, irregularities had been found in the documentation submitted to the city for zoning approval. Documents that bore Derek's signature, but that 3 members of the zoning committee had flagged as inconsistent with previous filings. The company's general counsel had retained an outside forensic accounting firm. The board had voted 6-2 to suspend Derek, pending their findings. The article included a quote from Derek's publicist. A woman named Camille, whom Isabel had met at 3 separate corporate events, and who had always seemed uncomfortable around her, saying that Derek was fully cooperating and that the allegations were without merit. Isabel read the article twice. She set her phone down on the kitchen table. She pressed her palms flat against the surface and breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth. Then she picked up the phone and texted Jenna back, "I'm not spiraling." What she felt, sitting there in her kitchen with her hands on the table and the afternoon light coming in through the window, was not satisfaction. It was something more complicated and quieter than that. Something closer to the feeling of finally understanding the shape of a thing you'd been living inside of for years without being able to name it. She had not arranged this. She had no hand in what was happening to Derek. But she was not, she realized, surprised. She called Beverly. "I saw the Tribune piece," Beverly said before Isabel could speak. "Is there anything I need to do?" "Nothing. You're completely separate. The divorce is finalized, the settlement is documented. His current legal problems have no bearing on you whatsoever. And if they try to make them my problem," Beverly paused, "then they'll have to go through me, and I have a very long memory for attempted document fraud." That was all Isabel needed to hear. She met Owen Callister at a site walkthrough. It was 2 weeks before her due date. She was technically supposed to be working from home, but the Alcott and Miles team had a problem on the River North project, a structural issue with the second-floor mezzanine load calculations that required eyes on the ground. And the lead architect, a man named Tim, had a family emergency and couldn't make it. Isabel had said she could go. Her colleague Rachel had looked at her stomach and said, "Are you sure?" Isabel had said, "It's a site visit, Rachel, not a marathon." She was standing on the ground floor of the unfinished building, reviewing the load-bearing column placements against the plans, when she heard someone say her name. Owen Callister was a commercial developer. She'd known his name professionally for years, the way you know anyone prominent in a mid-sized industry ecosystem, as a name that appears on project lists and in trade publications. She had not expected to see him on a construction site in River North at 3 in the afternoon, wearing work boots and holding a set of blueprints that looked nothing like the ones she was holding. "Isabel Crane," he said again, like he was confirming something. "You're on the Alcott team for this." "I am." My firm owns the East Parcel," he said. "We've been coordinating with your team on the shared infrastructure." "I'm Owen Callister. I know who you are." He smiled at that. Not a polished corporate smile, but something quicker and more genuine, the kind that happened before the person could decide whether or not to do it. Then his eyes moved, briefly and involuntarily, to her stomach, and then back up to her face, and she watched him decide, consciously, not to say anything about it. She respected that more than she expected to. They spent 45 minutes going through the infrastructure questions together. He was direct without being dismissive, which she found, in her current state of having very little patience for professional social theater, genuinely refreshing. He noticed things in the plans quickly. A drainage routing issue near the east boundary that her team had flagged but not yet resolved, and he'd already spoken to his civil engineer about it. He wasn't performing competence, he just had it. When they finished, he asked if she had time for coffee. She looked at him. She was 8.5 months pregnant. She'd been on her feet for 45 minutes on a concrete floor, and she had a 6 o'clock call with a client. "Maybe another time," she said. He nodded. He didn't push. He handed her his card, an actual physical card, which she hadn't seen someone do in years, and said, "Let me know if the drainage issue comes up again. I'll have my engineer loop in with yours." She put the card in her bag. She thought about it on the drive home, and then made herself stop thinking about it because she had other things to think about. She was 32 weeks pregnant. She was 7 pounds heavier than she'd ever been in her life. She was divorced, alone, and about to become the mother of 2 children who did not yet have names. This was not the time to think about Owen Callister's card. Her daughter was born first at 4:17 in the morning. Her son followed 9 minutes later. They were small, both of them the way twins often are, but they were healthy, and they were loud. And when the nurse placed them one by one in Isabel's arms, Isabel Crane, who had not cried when she signed her divorce papers, cried then. She named her daughter Margot. She named her son Ellis. Jenna stayed with her for the first week, sleeping on the pull-out sofa and getting up at 2 in the morning without being asked. Their mother flew in from Phoenix for the second week. Isabel slept in broken intervals and ate whatever was put in front of her. And gradually, slowly, in the way that new things become the only thing, learned the specific frequencies of 2 different cries and the particular way each of her children moved when they were falling asleep. She did not contact Derek. Derek contacted her. His attorney, not Philip Coates this time, but a different man, younger, less polished, named Spencer something, sent a formal letter through Beverly's office. Derek had learned, apparently through the kind of social network that exists when two people have been part of the same community for 14 years, that Isabel had given birth. The letter requested paternity confirmation and indicated Derek's intent to establish a parental rights claim. Beverly called Isabel the morning the letter arrived. "He found out," Beverly said. "I know. How do you want to handle this?" Isabel was sitting in the nursing chair in the smaller bedroom, Margot asleep in her arms. Ellis was in the bassinet 2 feet away, making small sounds that weren't quite crying. Outside it was raining, the long, soft spring rain that the Midwest does in May, when the trees are finally fully leafed out and everything smells like dirt and beginning. "Tell him I'll agree to paternity confirmation," Isabel said, "and then I need you to pull up the documentation on the supplementary agreement from the divorce." There was a pause. "The clause they tried to insert," Beverly said. "Yes, Isabel, that clause was never executed. It was pulled before. I know it wasn't executed. But it was submitted. It was drafted, it was submitted, and we have the dated copy with their firm's header on it." Another pause. When Beverly spoke again, there was something in her voice that Isabel recognized from their first meeting, the specific alertness of a person who has just seen the whole board. "I'll pull the file," she said. The paternity results confirmed what Isabel had already known. Derek Hargrove was the biological father of Margot and Ellis. His attorney filed the paperwork to establish parental rights the same week. Beverly filed a response the following Monday. The response included the dated, documented record of the clause. Derek's legal team had attempted to insert into the divorce settlement. The clause that, Beverly's filing argued, constituted a premeditated attempt to strip Isabel of parental protections before she had even known she was pregnant. The filing further noted that the submission had occurred during active legal proceedings, had been concealed within standard boilerplate language, and had been withdrawn only after being identified by opposing counsel, not disclosed voluntarily. Beverly did not characterize it as fraud in the filing. She didn't need to. She let the document speak. Derek's new attorney, Spencer Something, submitted a response calling the document an internal drafting error that had been immediately corrected upon discovery. Beverly replied, in 3 paragraphs of the most precise legal language Isabel had ever read, that an error corrected only after being caught by the opposing party is not a demonstration of good faith. The family court judge, a woman named the Honorable Patricia Dunmore, scheduled a hearing. Isabel had not been inside a courtroom since the divorce. She wore a navy blazer and the good earrings she'd bought herself the week she'd moved into the Logan Square apartment, and she sat beside Beverly at the plaintiff's table and kept her hands still in her lap and listened. Derek sat at the other table. He looked older than she remembered, or perhaps she was seeing him differently now. Without the 14 years of accumulated context, without the habit of reading his face for signals, he looked like a man who had made specific choices and was beginning to understand their weight. His attorney spoke first. He argued that the drafting error had no bearing on Derek's rights as a biological parent. He argued that the children's best interests required a relationship with both parents. He was not wrong about the second part. Beverly spoke second. She did not dispute the children's best interests. She argued that the court should consider the documented pattern of conduct, the attempted clause, the financial irregularities under investigation, the pattern of unilateral decision-making that Beverly was careful, precise, and absolutely unambiguous in describing. She presented the timeline. She presented the documents. She presented nothing that was not already on the record. Judge Dunmore asked several questions of both attorneys, in a tone that gave nothing away. The ruling came 2 weeks later. Derek was granted supervised visitation, structured, scheduled, and subject to review in 6 months. Full parental rights were contingent on the resolution of the ongoing financial investigation into Hargrove Real Estate and a formal finding of no criminal misconduct. Until that finding was made, Beverly's documented concerns about judgment and character would remain part of the court record. It was not everything. It was not the clean, absolute outcome that some part of Isabel had wanted, the part that still remembered sitting across a conference table from a man who looked at her like an inconvenience. But it was enough. It was in fact the right outcome, the one that acknowledged complexity without excusing it. She thanked Beverly in the parking garage afterward. Beverly said, Don't thank me, you knew what you had. Which was true. She had coffee with Owen Callister 6 weeks later. He had emailed twice during the preceding months. Once about the drainage issue, which had been resolved, and once with no professional pretext at all, a short message that said, "I heard things have been eventful. I hope you're doing well." No pressure to respond. She had read it on a Wednesday night while Ellis was sleeping in the crook of her arm, and she had not responded until Saturday, and what she wrote was, "Eventful is one word for it. I'm well. Thank you for asking." They met at a coffee place in Ukrainian Village on a Saturday morning when Jenna had offered to watch Margot and Ellis for 2 hours. Isabel arrived first. Owen arrived 2 minutes later, shook the rain from his jacket, saw her at the corner table, and crossed the room without looking around, the way people do when they know exactly where they're going. They talked for 2.5 hours. Jenna called at the 2-hour mark, and Isabel texted back, "Give me a few more minutes." Jenna texted back a single emoji that communicated a very large amount of information. Owen did not ask her to explain her situation. She found herself explaining parts of it anyway. Not the full chronology, not the legal details, but the shape of it, the texture of the past year, the particular kind of recalibration required when the structure you've organized your life around turns out to have been built on something other than what you believed. He listened in the specific way that some people can, without performing attentiveness or rushing toward resolution, and when he said things, they were things she hadn't already said to herself. He was 42. He had been through a difficult end of his own, a business partnership that had dissolved badly, a period of rebuilding that had taken longer than he'd expected. He wasn't performing resilience about it. He just described it plainly, the way you describe something you've already made peace with. She liked that. She liked him. "I have 2 infants," she said, at some point in the second hour, as though this were a thing he might have overlooked. "I know," he said, "and my life is currently an ongoing legal situation." "You mentioned, and I'm still figuring out who I am when I'm not organized around someone else's schedule." He looked at her across the table with the same directness he'd had on the construction site, the same quality of attention that didn't perform itself. "That sounds like something worth figuring out," he said. "I'm not suggesting anything that needs to be decided right now." She looked at him for a moment. Outside, the rain had stopped and the sun had come out the way Chicago sun does in early summer, sudden and generous and slightly too bright. "Okay," she said. "Okay, we can do this again." He smiled, the quick, genuine one. "I'd like that." 3 months later, the Hargrove real estate investigation concluded. The forensic accounting firm found that the zoning documents bearing Derek's signature had been altered by someone inside the company. A senior project manager who had been skimming from infrastructure contracts and had needed specific approvals to move without scrutiny. The alteration of Derek's signature had been the mechanism, not the goal. Derek had not ordered it. He had not known. What the investigation also found, documented in the appendix of a 200-page report that his legal team did not make public, but that Beverly obtained through discovery, was that Derek had been informed of internal accounting irregularities 6 months before the Tribune article ran. He had been informed by 2 separate employees. He had not escalated either report. He had, according to internal email records, replied to one of them with a message that read, "Let's discuss offline." There was no record of any offline discussion. He had not committed the fraud. But he had seen the shape of it, and he had looked away. The board voted to accept his resignation. Hargrove Real Estate was sold in pieces over the following 8 months. Derek's stake was sufficient to avoid bankruptcy, but the company he had spent 20 years building, the one Isabel had spent 14 years supporting from the margins, was gone. Isabel heard about the resignation from Beverly, who sent a brief text, "Board accepted. Thought you should know." She was sitting in the backyard of the Logan Square apartment building. They had a small shared garden, mostly overgrown, that she'd started clearing out over the spring. Ellis was in the baby carrier on her chest, asleep. Margot was on a blanket 2 feet away, doing the specific concentrated work of trying to roll over for what seemed like the 100th time that week. Isabel read Beverly's text. She sat with it for a moment. Then she put her phone in her pocket and looked at Margot, who had, while Isabel wasn't watching, finally rolled over and was now looking up at the sky with an expression of pure uncomplicated surprise. "Good job." Isabel told her. Margot, not yet understanding words but fully understanding tone, smiled. The family court review happened in November. The financial investigation had concluded. Derek's criminal liability had been assessed as minimal. He was fined, not charged. The court modified the visitation arrangement. Derek was granted standard parenting time, unsupervised, on a schedule negotiated by both attorneys. It was, ultimately, the outcome a functional legal system produces when neither party is a monster and both are capable of choosing their children over themselves. Isabel had expected to feel more about this than she did. What she felt, mostly, was tired in the specific way of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has finally set it down. Not empty, just lighter. She watched Derek hold Margot for the first time in the courthouse waiting room, before the formal exchange protocol began. His face changed when Margot grabbed his finger. The way faces change, when they encounter something genuinely overwhelming. When the defenses a person has built simply don't apply, and the feeling arrives before the self-protection can intercept it. Isabel watched that happen and did not soften, exactly, but understood something she hadn't quite understood before about what was complicated and what was simple. The simple part. What he had done to her was not something she needed to forgive on any particular schedule. The complicated part. He was the father of her children, and Margot had his hands, and Ellis had his eyes. And these two small people, who were the best thing Isabel had ever done with her life, deserved a father who would show up. She would not make that harder than it needed to be. Owen came to the Logan Square apartment for the first time on a Sunday in December. He brought coffee from the place in Ukrainian Village. He sat on the floor with Margot and Ellis because the couch had been temporarily taken over by a mountain of folded laundry that Isabel had not yet had an opportunity to put away. And he did not mention the laundry, and he talked to the babies in the serious, respectful tone he might use with a colleague, which they seemed to appreciate. Margot fell asleep in his arms at some point in the third hour. He didn't move. He just shifted slightly so she was more comfortable and kept talking. Isabel sat across from him with her coffee and watched and thought about the years she'd been through. The kitchen counter with the unsigned papers, the conference table, the bathtub with the test in her hand, the construction site, the courtroom, the shared garden in July, the full shape of a year laid out like a set of plans that had been drawn and redrawn until they finally made sense. "Can I tell you something?" she said. "Yes," Owen said, looking at her over Margot's sleeping head. "A year ago I was in a conference room and I signed my name, and I thought the thing I felt was numbness. But I think now it was actually," she paused, reaching for the word, relief. "I think I already knew. I'd known for longer than I'd admitted." He didn't say anything for a moment. Outside, the first real snow of the winter was coming down. Not Chicago's dramatic sideways snow, just the quiet, early kind, settling on the window ledge, and on the overgrown garden below, and on the whole familiar, complicated city. "What do you know now?" he asked. Isabel looked at Margot in his arms. She looked at Ellis asleep in the bassinet across the room, one small fist raised beside his ear. She looked at the window, and the snow, and the light coming in from the west, the same light she had chosen this apartment for, without fully knowing why. "That I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," she said. And she meant every word of it.